All right, as everyone is getting settled in, I will get going here. My name is Madison Muxworthy. I'm the Soil, Moisture, Water, and Snow Program Manager at the Yampa Valley Sustainability Council and co-chair of the Yampa Basin Rendezvous, and so it's such a delight to have the microphone to welcome you all back again. This is a quick reminder that we have up here on the slides. We're going to have, as Carrie mentioned, the Protect the Dolores film. It's going to be on June 4th at 5 to 8 p.m. at Bud Warner Memorial Library. So definitely check that out. And also a quick call out to the 5th graders from Steamboat Mountain School who painted storm drains down on Yampa Street. So when you're downtown, take a look at that. It's a great local thing that the 5th graders just did. Awesome. And so with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our panel for moderator for our panel entitled Slow Water Solutions. You've already heard about this individual. Erica Guys gave a wonderful talk last night for us at our State of the River address. And so I'll just briefly introduce her again here. Erica Guys is an award-winning independent journalist who writes about water, climate change, plants, and critters for Scientific American, the New York Times, Nature, The Atlantic, The Guardian, National Geographic, The Economist, Washington Post, Biographic, Wired, and more. Her book, Water Always Wins, which hopefully you all got a copy of last night, Thriving in an Age of Drought and Deluge, is about what she calls slow water. Innovations that are helping us adapt to the increasing floods and droughts brought by climate change. So it's now my pleasure to turn it over to Erica.
Hello, good morning. So I know some of you heard me last night, some of you I think didn't. So I'm just going to talk about a few of the key concepts in my book that are relevant to the work that the speakers that we're going to be hearing from are working on. So basically, in our dominant culture, we have a tendency, and by that I mean like Euro-American culture, to think of water either as a resource or commodity or a threat. But there are innovators today around the world, including the two panelists, Jackie Corday and Cheryl, I'm going to mispronounce her name, Cheryl Swalek, who are what I think of as water detectives. They approach water with curiosity, and they are moving from a control mindset to collaboration. And this is the slow water movement. And climate change is getting a lot of attention in terms of a cause for these water extremes that we're experiencing, too much and too little water. But equally important are our development choices, urban sprawl, industrial agriculture, in a very kind of control-oriented way that we approach water. So basically the control-driven infrastructure, gray infrastructure, is brittle. And as these systems fail increasingly often, we're faced to force this truth that water always wins sooner or later. Natural systems, on the other hand, are much more flexible. They are, they evolved to deal with change, and so they're more resilient. And this Euro-American colonial mindset is really centered around human desires. Humans are most important. What do we want? What do we need? And that often leads to single-minded problem solving. So, we have scarcity, build a dam, bring in water from somewhere else. We're worried about flooding, build a wall, build a levee. But putting ourselves first in this way isn't working because we're ignoring water's agency and relationship with soil and rock, microbes, beavers, humans. And basically, when we ignore these complex systems, we undermine them. And that's not accounted for in the way that we value our gray infrastructure solutions. Healthy ecosystems, on the other hand, are resilient because they evolved to adapt to disruption. But when we disrupt them in the extreme, they break down. And our incomplete understanding of that complexity is why these gray infrastructure solutions so often cause these unintended consequences of actually making flooding and water scarcity worse. So the scale of our impact has been really extreme. Here are a few statistics. And I just want to add that gray infrastructure is also an environmental justice issue. I think people understand that levees raise the level of a river, and that increases risk to people who can't afford a levee or can't afford to maintain that levee. And we've seen that, like in California, for example, in the city of Pajaro, it was a poor community, their levee wasn't maintained, and that they are the ones who suffered when the flood risk came. But dams are also an environmental justice issue. They bring water to 20% of the world's population, but decrease water availability to 24% of the world's population. So, there's a lot of environmental harms associated with dams, but there are also social harms. And then there's a field called sociohydrology, which looks at this relationship between people and water. And the people who are receiving water or levees, they might seem lucky, but in fact, they're putting themselves more at risk with these solutions. So there's something called the levee effect, which is, people have kind of a false sense of security when a levee is built. And so you see this again and again. There was massive flooding in '93 on the Mississippi River in St. Louis, and they built a 500-year levee, and then tons of housing and businesses moved into that formerly unoccupied floodplain. And so, the risk of flooding may be decreased, but then when flooding does come, those people are harmed more extensively, or more people are at risk. And I'm sure you guys are familiar with the old adage about two kinds of levees, ones that have failed and ones that are going to fail. And similarly, there's a reservoir effect, which also creates that false sense of security. So again and again, when you see new water supply brought in, that just increases demand. It encourages more agriculture, more businesses, more homes developed in the area, and then you have more people who are subject to that cycle of water scarcity in that area, which doesn't have enough water for all of the people who are living there now. But this approach isn't the only way that humans think of water. There are many cultures around the world, many indigenous cultures, many agrarian cultures, who live closer to the land, who understand water instead of a commodity or a threat as a relative or a friend. And that kind of mindset fosters an attitude of reciprocity and care, caretaking for water systems and relationships and water's agency, basically systems thinking. And really, again and again, it's shown to be an abundance mindset rather than a scarcity mindset. So in the dominant culture, in water-scarce places, we're worried about every molecule. But when you care for water systems, it's healthier and it's better able to provide for us. So these water innovators, including my co-panelists today, are asking instead, what does water want? And so basically, what water wants is a return of its many slow phases, wetlands, floodplains, mountain meadows, and forests that we have altered with our development. And so, like slow food, slow water solutions are unique to each place. They have some common themes, but they look at each area's local geology, ecology, and culture and try to work within that. So it's ideally local, understanding the local water cycle and availability, and working with that. It's socially just. There's a community engagement component. In some places, the community is actively managing the watershed and supply. In other places, maybe it's more of an educational component. I saw that yesterday when I was walking along the river trail here in Steamboat. There are many, many signs explaining all of the benefits of wetlands and everything that the project is doing. And that's another way to engage the community with your with your slow water project. And these projects are also distributed. You know, in the dominant culture, we have centralized water management, where experts are in charge and all the water is brought to a central location. These projects are scattered throughout the landscape, which makes sense when you think about the vast scale of what we've disrupted. So the first step in slow water projects is starting with historical ecology, and that's basically mapping what water did before we dramatically altered it. And this is a picture of Seattle, of the Duwamish Valley, and the picture on the left is the stream in its more natural state, and then the very straightened, controlled version today. And so the idea of doing this historical ecology is to understand what water wants, and therefore to recognize, like, oh, okay, we built in a wetland here, this is why this area keeps flooding. And so that offers an opportunity for longer-term planning to try to return spaces for water where possible to relieve some of that pressure. And I'll just add that, like, nature-based solutions are growing around the world, but among decision makers, there's still this attitude of like, oh, that's nice, but it can't be a significant part of the solution. But that's really a misunderstanding of scale. You know, that 87% of the world's wetlands that we've eradicated, you begin to understand why we need lots of little projects, and also how their impact is cumulative. So the more, you know, starting small helps, every little bit helps, but cumulatively it can add up to a really significant impact. Sort of the way that solar panels on roofs add up to a lot of power. So there's more about these concepts in my book, Water Always Wins, which is available at Off the Beaten Path bookstore here in Steamboat, and also online if you're from out of town, all the usual places. And it contains stories of people around the world who are collaborating with water in this slow water way and making their communities more resilient. So next we're going to hear from two people who are implementing slow water in Colorado. And their work is helping to buffer their communities against flood and drought. And of course there's also a climate reduction risk because 25% of our emissions come from land use change. And these types of projects that support wetlands and forests have a significant carbon storage component, and also support other forms of life, not just for biodiversity itself, which is very important, but these critters and plants are actively keeping these systems functioning. And it's more stimulating habitat for us, which I think people in this room are very familiar with in terms of being able to enjoy rivers. So, this I took yesterday, the Yampa River right here in town. And this project is a great example of slow water, although it's flowing pretty fast right now in some parts of it. Anyway, our next speakers are going to talk in more depth about projects that they're working on. And, sorry. Here's the longer version of Jackie's going first, right? Yep. Jackie, are you here? Sorry. Right in front of me. Okay, so Jackie Corday is the owner of Corday Natural Resources Consulting, she's a land and water conservation lawyer with more than 2 decades collaborating with local, state, federal agencies and nonprofits to solve challenges to natural resource issues with focus on stream and watershed health. She was previously the head of Colorado Parks and Wildlife's Water Resources section in Denver and moved to Montrose in late 2019 to begin her consulting company. American Rivers hired her to coordinate the efforts of the Colorado Healthy Headwaters Working Group, a statewide collection of stream and restoration experts, scientists, agency, academic, and nonprofit staff who are working together to amplify headwater restoration in Colorado. She's done extensive research on the benefits of low-tech, process-based restoration and common implementation barriers, including concerns about water rights and social issues. She also works with Audubon on restoration policy issues and is researching river health information gaps and how to address them. She also recently published a white paper that talks about all these issues, which I think she will mention. Yeah, please welcome Jackie.
Um, Good morning, everyone, and thanks for your interest in this topic. I first going to give you just a quick little background on who is the Healthy Headwaters Working Group and what are our goals, just so you have some context for how and why I'm doing this research on process-based restoration in particular. So, when I was still at Colorado Parks and Wildlife, head of the Water Resources section, in 2019, I reached out to American Rivers, Faye Hartman, and said, I've been doing all this research on process-based restoration, and I'm seeing what's happening in California on all of these partners coming together, and they're seemingly able to accomplish so much more when they come together and collaborate than just staying in your own silos. And so I thought, how about we bring together a workshop with all of these different nonprofits and agencies that are doing stream restoration here in Colorado, see if they want to work together. So that's what we did. In December 2019, we had this workshop, and the purpose was to discuss collaborating together to increase the pace, scale, and value of headwaters restoration. And it was a very successful workshop, and at the end of the workshop, everybody agreed, yes, let's form a new group, which was called the Colorado Healthy Headwaters Working Group. And again, as I mentioned, we were inspired by what was happening in California. During the 2012 to 2016 drought crisis, as Erica has mentioned and what was in her book, it's like the gray infrastructure was not enough. It was not enough to provide water security in California. And so that brought many more people to the table because the science was showing the other way, another way, in addition to gray infrastructure, that healthy functioning watersheds, the green infrastructure, was just as important, if not more, in my opinion, than the gray. And that we needed to make sure that that was healthy and functioning as well as the gray infrastructure. And so that brought many more people to the table. And that was what was really critical, because usually for decades, any stream and wetland restoration that was happening, you have the usual players that you're familiar with that were at the table. So you had your federal and state land management agencies, you had your water quality agencies like EPA, and conservation groups. But when science was showing the way that ecosystem services are delivered at such a greater, higher value when you're functioning, when your watersheds are functioning and healthy, then that means it's a win-win for everybody to do that work. And so then you started having people come to the table, such as water conservation and conservancy districts, water providers, utilities, natural disaster agencies, and agencies that are focused on increasing the resiliency to drought, fires, and floods. So if you have all of those people at the table, there's just that many more resources, both funding and expertise, to get the work done. So we saw that model, what was happening in California, and we thought we could hopefully replicate that here in Colorado. So we brought together this Healthy Headwaters Working Group, and it has kind of the same components as what was happening in California. Your researchers, CSU, CEMU, MSI, Mountain State, and Institute, there we go. And federal agencies and nonprofits, watershed groups, and practitioners that do this type of work. And our vision was work together to increase the pace, scale, and the value of process-based headwaters riverscape restoration. A lot of terms to unpack there, but I think most in the audience are familiar with these terms now. Process-based restoration, riverscapes, but I will explain them a little bit more as we go into this PowerPoint. And we formed two subcommittees because this work really needs to be done at the policy and communication way and through science and projects. So those were the two subcommittees that were formed. And this graphic is just, when I first saw it, oh, I don't know, 3 years ago, it was like, wow, that is just so beautiful. It just so perfectly shows what, is possible. First of all, the science is showing how to do this, how to take this degraded stream that doesn't benefit anyone to this healthy, functioning stream where your surface water is increased, your aquifer recharge, your groundwater has increased from what this is. That benefits all people and wildlife, and that's the essence of the vision of what we're trying to do, is increase that around Colorado. So that's part one, like what is our goal, what is our mission with the Healthy Headwaters? And we're focused on, in particular, low-tech process-based restoration or beaver-related restoration. So I'm going to explain in this next few slides, what does that mean? So process-based restoration approaches depend on the cause of the stream degradation. So that's one of the first principles of process-based restoration. Is you need to look at upstream. Maybe there's a particular stretch you're trying to restore, but you need to be looking upstream and understanding what caused that degradation, because you don't want to do a project and then have it come undone again because there's still degradation happening upstream that's just going to wipe out your project. So they often start by looking at, okay, what were the causes of this degradation? And sometimes it's, there was too many undersized culverts that were put in on a lot of Forest Service roads, for example. So they're a fish barrier. They're also not allowing sediment to go through, where it's, undersized culverts funnel the force and the energy of the water, and it down cuts the stream. So that might be the problem in a particular case. Sometimes wood recruitment has been lost because of old forestry practices a long time ago, meaning taken out a lot of the wood that naturally would have gotten into the stream. Our second speaker, Cheryl, is going to be talking about this one, reducing gully erosion on rangelands by stopping head cuts. Here's another one that we've talked about, Erica has mentioned today, removing or setting back levees in floodplains to restore the former river footprint. Of course, that can cost millions, depending on the size and the scale that you're working at. So what we're talking about, what I'm focused on specifically today is this last one, low-tech process-based restoration. It's a subset of process-based restoration. And it's particularly looking at reconnecting incised streams to their floodplain with natural materials and not big, heavy equipment, hence the low-tech. So here's an example of a river in South Park, Colorado. And it's really quite amazing. You can see the healthy riparian vegetation and the stream very tightly, meandering back and forth on one side, and then on the other side of the highway, the vegetation is completely removed, and it was probably based on unmanaged grazing that came in over the decades and took out that vegetation. So how, you look at that and you say, well, how can we restore that degraded, that's on the other side of the highway? How can you restore that? Well, if you did it based on how stream restoration has been done for the past few decades, you could come in with heavy equipment and pull back those incised degraded channels and reset it. But that's what science is showing has not really done the job that we had hoped it was going to do. We're not getting the ecological lift that folks might have thought that was going to provide. And so if you think about that from a low-tech perspective, maybe you would come in there and try to mimic beavers and slowly degrade that incised stream over the years and allow it to reconnect so that the willows, which are just upstream, and there's a huge seed base there, will find their way down and find that new graded area and start replanting themselves and reseed in themselves. It will take time, but when you think about the scale of this, this is, you know, why low-tech has so many advantages, because it doesn't cost nearly as much. And it, you know, over time, give it time, it does a much better job. So in this next slide, I'm explaining another subset of the low-tech PBR is called beaver mimicry. It's basically saying, where were the beavers before, historically? Where can they come back again and do their incredible work 24/7 for free for us? So you need to be looking at where that is appropriate. Obviously, in urban areas, for the most part, that's not going to be appropriate. So looking in places higher in the watershed where there's not going to be conflicts for them flooding roads and the infrastructure is going to be the appropriate place. So if you found your appropriate place, you know that they were historically, there's clues there that they were there, you can utilize beaver mimicry structures to help trying to start getting some cooling behind it, getting the aggregation to start happening, and then beavers, the goal is that you hope beavers will come in and take over your work and maintain it 24/7. And that's exactly what can happen if you plan your project right, and that's what happened here in this South Park project. The beaver came back within 1 year of having put in beaver mimicry structures, and now they're taking over and restoring the health of this stream. These are just some more pictures of some more examples from the first one. On the top is here in the Upper Gunnison Basin. This one is in Utah. This one's in Oregon. This is a post-assisted log structure, pallets, and beaver mimicry structures here that span the whole channel. And again, the idea is slowly to upgrade that system and let it reconnect with the floodplain. And then, as I said, if you're fortunate, you've done some good planning, beaver will come in and take over. But not all low-tech process-based restoration has to do with beaver. Just want to make sure you understand that that's not always the situation. So Cheryl in particular is going to be talking about ephemeral rangeland streams where beaver were not there historically. There's not enough water for them to be there, but you can still do incredible work without beaver, and that's what these pictures are showing. How many of you have heard of the Zedic rock structures? Okay, great. So most of you understand the work and the principles behind this work is basically protecting and restoring these incredible mesic areas in rangeland. And then this other picture, Erica mentioned last night in her talk. This comes from Dr. Laura Norman in southeast Arizona, and this is that ranch that you talked about, where they built over 20 years, 20,000 of these little rock structures. Beavers were probably in southeast Arizona, good knows how long ago, 200, 300 years ago. They're, for the most part, not there now. And so they're not necessarily trying to mimic beavers, they're trying to just use these rocks to slow down the flow, slow the water, let it pause. And as Dr. Norman's research showed, that had tremendous benefits for keeping that water on the land for people and for wildlife. So part 3 of my talk is, again, going more deeper into why low-tech process-based restoration of headwater streams is, in particular, what our Healthy Headwaters group is supporting and why we're focused on that. So this really comes into the research that I have done over the past couple of years. 3 big reasons. First, the scale of the problem. When I started this research, I had no idea about the scale of the problem of degraded rivers. I wonder, Erica, as you were doing your research, did you have any idea of just the scale of it? It's just amazing. how many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of miles around the world have been completely altered by human use, one way or another, whether that was grazing or mining or logging. Certainly most all of the rivers in Oregon and Washington were dramatically altered by the logging practices that were there. And then, of course, dams change that. Well, here in Colorado, 97% of our major rivers have experienced floodplain alteration. So that's rendering their floodplains partially or wholly non-functional. And I just grabbed a little screenshot of a study that was done for all of the western states, and you can see just 3 are listed here: Arizona, California, and Colorado. But you can see the percentages of how much stream floodplain alteration has occurred. So, and then climate change is exacerbating that as far as you've got the scale of degraded rivers, and now it's being magnified by climate change. So if you've got a huge scale of a problem, you need low-cost, scalable solutions. And these numbers were repeated when the Roaring Fork did their State of the Roaring Fork Watershed Plan in 2019. They found that more than 2/3 of their streams were moderately to severely degraded riparian habitat. So these are pretty consistent numbers. Also with an EPA report that was done in 2014 on the state of western rivers, they came up with those same figures. About 2/3 of the rivers are degraded. The degree of floodplain alteration differs substantially in Colorado's. These are just pictures that I've taken in western Colorado. You can see on the bottom, it's only about 2 feet of incision, and yet that 2 feet is making a huge difference in what's happening with the riparian vegetation. You can see that gal is sitting there right next to the creek. Normally you should not be able to sit right there. It should be all wet. Then you can see this other one that's 4 to 5 feet, and then you can see this other very sorry stream. It was hard for me to even take that picture, to stop along the highway and take that picture. It made me so sad. To see that, you can see it's all severely degraded, and there's hardly riparian vegetation. So the second reason why low-tech PBR as a solution, the science. And this is where I spent a huge part of last year. American Rivers applied for a CWCB grant called Engaging West Slope Agriculture and Headwater Restoration to Improve Water Security. One of the first deliverables that we had for this grant was to do a state of the science review of low-tech process-based restoration across the western states, to have a good foundation and understanding of where is the science on that. When I first started the project in January of last year, and we hired one of Ellen Lowell's grad student, PhD grad student, Sarah Henshaw, and the two of us set out to start looking for all of the papers that were published. And then we knew, because this is such an emerging science, we needed to reach out to a ton of people that are doing this work to find unpublished case studies and talk to them about how that's going and what are they seeing. So this paper gathers both the published and the unpublished. And I first thought the paper was going to be maybe about 20 pages. I blew past that, and I was at 50, and I was like, man, I'm still finding so much incredible research. I found way more than I thought that I was going to find. So yeah, it is 70 pages, but there is a 6-page executive summary if you don't have time to read the whole thing, and that's on the website there that I put there. Yeah. Okay. So then, what the research focused on this paper was how, when you take a stream from this incised degraded system to a healthy system, what are the effects? And let's see. I'm going to have to skip over this slide just in the interest of time, but I put together a slide of where is this research coming from. Functioning connected floodplains, research has been around for 30 some odd years, very solid. But here was the interesting thing, beaver. There was almost 1,400 papers published in the last 80 years documenting the positive ecological effects of beaver complexes. So we've known this stuff about beavers for a long time. It seems that just each generation has to keep rediscovering it. So here's the heart of the paper, the science. What happens to the surface water? What happens to the groundwater? The water quality, natural disasters, drought, wildfire, carbon sequestration, floods. Also found great information on economic benefits, the ecosystem services. Of course, we all know the ecological benefits. And then the benefits to the agriculture community in particular, increased water and forage availability. So this slide summarizes in one slide what those benefits are documented to be. Increased resilience to wildfire and drought by re-wetting the soils and providing fire breaks. Improved water quality by reducing sedimentation and filtering out other pollutants. Because when you have those healthy connected floodplains, that's one of the functions that it provides, is doing these things. Reduced flood risks, improved river habitat, and then again, the agricultural benefits were availability of water and forage was increased for both livestock and wildlife. These are just some incredible graphics of showing you a low-tech process-based project going from an incised stream to 1 year later, beaver coming in and taking over, and so you're seeing the hydrology change and reconnect to what it historically was before the degradation occurred. And this graphic shows you what's happening below, recharging that aquifer and bringing the groundwater table up so more riparian plants naturally survive, because now their roots will reach that water. And sometimes there's documented cases of showing that this can lead to increased later season flows. That hydrograph, instead of this being this very peaked, flashy, unnatural hydrograph, goes from that to being, what it was before, and it can have longer season flows into the summer. Water quality benefits, this picture shows it all. The muddy water that you see in the jug is from up above a series of beaver dams, and that was caused mainly by intensive agriculture. This was done in an area in England where there was intensive agriculture up above, and they allowed beaver to come back and do a series of beaver dams, and within a couple of years, they were tracking and monitoring all this, and you can see how clean the water is below the beaver dams. This is another really great slide that I borrowed from the Roaring Fork Watershed Biodiversity Initiative. They came up with this idea of calling the river on the left the riparian, the single channel with hardly any riparian vegetation, and a healthy natural functioning system with a series of whole bunch of beaver ponds. And you can see that how that is going to be much more drought resilient than the other one. And we can think of it as a second snowpack. Really great science coming out from Dr. Emily Fairfax. I'm sure a lot of you have probably heard about her work, and just the pictures are just absolutely amazing, showing her studies have shown that riparian vegetation survives at rates of 3 times greater rate of survival when there is beaver complexes versus not. So you see the side of the river that had the beaver complexes and the other one that didn't. And this is the same effect here in the Cameron Peak Fire of the Poudre. And you can see how the beaver complex is the only thing that survived there. And then you can see the sediment capture in that healthy river system post-fire. And this slide is showing you about a summary of incredible studies by Dr. Susan Charney with the USDA Pacific Research Station showing the benefits to agriculture. A lot of great studies mentioned in the paper about this, so I won't be able to have time to go through it, but that's all in the paper. Important considerations for low-tech, like where is this appropriate, and then the things that you need to think about are also in the paper. Because it is not a panacea, it's not the right solution for every place. You need to be thinking through a lot of things. And the third reason why low-tech PBR, the economics. Large-scale problems need cost-effective, scalable solutions, and it usually costs about 1/10 of the cost to do that approach versus the traditional approach with heavy equipment. And again, the Dottie Ravine is an incredible example. They were given the option of spending $1 million to restore their stream or $60,000 with using beaver. And that picture shows you the result of the $60,000. And it happened way faster than they even imagined. They thought it would take 10 years. It took 3 years to go from what you see in the top to the bottom. And this last slide is just possibilities for the Yampa River Basin. You can see I circled in red steamboat, and this is a tool that the Colorado Natural Heritage Program has hosted for free online. It's called the Beaver Restoration Assessment Tool, and it shows you where the possibilities are. The yellow means that there's some possibilities there, being able to bring them back and utilize them to help you build your drought and fire resilience in your watershed. So I'll leave it with that.
Are you going to set up the Zoom? Oh, okay. Yeah, so next we're going to hear from Cheryl Swellick, who's with the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy District. And she is a water resource specialist and coordinates with the Gunnison Basin Wet Meadow and Riparian Restoration Collaborative with public and private partners. After a stint in land conservation and conducting a 3-year river use study on the Slate River in Crested Butte, Colorado, Cheryl joined the staff of the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy District in January 2022 to take a deeper dive on improving eco-hydrology health and function through wet meadow restoration. And I believe after Cheryl's talk, which is coming, there she is, hopefully we'll have time for a little bit of Q&A.
Great. First, I just want to check if everybody can hear me. Thumbs up. Hello? And let me just share my screen. Great. So first off, I wish I was all there with you. I'm sorry I'm not there to join in. It's been a crazy start to the field season with our conservation crew, but I'm happy to at least be able to join via Zoom. I also just want to say what an honor it is to share the stage with Erica, just a fearless author, willing to dig into tough topics. And then likewise for Jackie, she's such an incredible advocate for healthy and functioning rivers, and I'm ever in awe of her knowledge, passion, and ability. So thank you to both of you, and also Jackie for that great setup to showcase the Z-Bike style toolbox of low-tech PBR. And with that idea of a toolbox in mind, just like different home projects, you might have different tools and materials for plumbing than you might have for flooring. Same here, and what we're doing is restoration on ephemeral and intermittent streams. So this here, my little laser on. So ephemeral intermittent streams rather than say perennial streams. And to do that, we're utilizing rock structures that help to slow down and spread out runoff, like you see in this picture here. I always like to set the stage a little bit, and how did this all come about? How did we get here? Well, in 2009, public and private partners convened the Gunnison Climate Working Group, and this group was comprised of people from Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Service, Natural Resource Conservation Service, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, Colorado Natural Heritage Program, National Park Service, Gunnison County, Trout Unlimited, Western Colorado University, and many others, including private landowners and ranchers as well. The working group, they were looking to understand threats posed by climate change to the Gunnison Basin, and then identify adaptation strategies and promote a coordinated implementation of those strategies to the predicted climate change impacts. So listed here are the climate projections that they were confronting and that they were concerned about. And each one of these predictions is now currently occurring. Stream runoff events, birdification, and a disappearing snowpack. An area that was identified by the group as high priority or as highly sensitive to climate change were wet meadows in the sagebrush biome. And this is critical root-bearing habitat for the federally listed Gunnison sagegrass. And that habitat has become fragmented or degraded due to development and past land use. And the Fish and Wildlife Service has listed the protection, preservation, and restoration of habitat as a priority 1 action to cover the species. So these areas are extremely important for wildlife resilience. What are these wet meadows? They're these beautiful green gems of rich soil and vegetation in U-shaped valley ranges of the sagebrush landscape, and they act as sponges. They attenuate that runoff and increase the resilience of the sagebrush to climate extremes. Though they represent only 3% of the sagebrush, about 80% of wildlife, not just sage grouse, but game, neotropical migratory birds, pollinators, and other aquatic and terrestrial wildlife depend on these areas. They've also become critical to livestock for forage as well. Now, these wet meadow areas are not special to the Gunnison Basin. They may be important to the Gunnison sage-grouse, but these wet meadows exist within the sagebrush steppe across the west. Here's Gunnison, got my little prairie chicken there. And here's the steamboat area, rabbit ears. Anybody recognize this photo? Does this look familiar, like a familiar area to folks? This is the Hayden area, near Steamboat. This habitat is critical across the West. It is not just a Gunnison problem. So what are we so concerned about with these wet meadows? As I mentioned, due to past land use, these areas have become degraded from old wagons being driven up the delicate soil mass and the valley bottom, along with roads, trails, and ungulate trailing, also just causing that water to concentrate. So water would sheet flow across the landscape, but then as it hits these trails and roads, it creates a channel that then incisors, you can see here, incisors into that soft soil sponge and begins to downcut and create head cuts. Here's a head cut. Head cuts are big nasty. As water speeds up, it falls over the lip, and then all that energy scours into the soft soil, causing our soil to be lost, and that water table will drop out. And these head cuts, they will advance up a meadow system, draining them and leaving them vulnerable to land conversion and continued aridification. The natural hydrology in these wet meadows or mountain swale communities should not be, what they should be is shallow dispersed sheet flows, not a concentrated channel. So after the working group finalized their findings and climate vulnerability report in 2011, the Nature Conservancy came in to oversee that project implementation of adaptation strategies like wet meadow preservation and restoration. Just bringing that water table back up, allowing sedimentation to occur, and improving base flows to restore hydrologic function. In all, restore the resilience of the sagebrush habitat to drought and aridification. And I love this diagram because I think it really shows what happens to the landscape when water starts to downcut and becomes disconnected from its floodplain. The land dries out, you lose vegetation, and the water is gone in a flash. So what is this word resilience? You know, it gets thrown around a lot these days, and the term that you'll hear is resilience is the capacity of the system to absorb impacts without changing states or the ability of the system to recover from primary stresses or disturbances. For us, resilience means bringing that water table back up so that water can move slowly through the system, keeping the water here just a little bit longer and have that runoff attenuation. Today, we see streams combined to a single channel and all that precipitation just flashing off. And yet these streams are and were much more dynamic and interconnected. I mentioned that disappearing snowpack, and this work is an answer to that. And that is resilience, at least for us. So how do we do these things to increase resilience, to preserve, protect, and restore habitat? The Nature Conservancy, they hired restoration guru Bill Zeedyk. He was an old forester and was involved with EPA work early on. He also did restoration work in the Southwest, and he's also the co-author of Let the Water Do the Work. And while he was in New Mexico, the Four Corners area, doing restoration, Bill stumbled across ancestral puebloan rock structures, which were functioning. They were still functioning hundreds of years later. And he brought those ideas back to Gunnison. And this list here is some of those structures that he both saw while in the Four Corners areas, and then also some of his own designs. And this toolbox is not exhaustive, and it really depends on the site and the issues that are observed. And so I went looking for a toolbox photo and stumbled on this, and so I had to include it. You know, we've got this old, battered, and rusty toolbox, and then with care and maintenance, it's restored, and so now it can continue to operate and function. In our toolbox, we have 4 types of structures. We have grade control, and that helps to slow the water down, put the brakes on, long enough for the water to drop its sediment load and cool its erosive heels. And then we also have the head cut control. And that is really a preventative and preservation structure. And with that, it's stopping or arresting a head cut from advancing that channel. And then we also have restoring sheet flow. And what that is doing is getting water up out of an erosive channel and back out onto the floodplain. And then lastly, we have behavioral structures. And it's all about addressing the cause of erosion, and it helps to push, say, ungulates, roads, and trails up out of the drainage. So, just to go over some of those structures, this is the One Rock Dam, and this is the workhorse of the Wet Meadows project. It's a grade control structure. As you can see, it's not just one rock, it's one rock and height. And that's what helps to put those brakes on and spread the water out. By slowing down runoff, especially during, say, a big monsoon event, this structure introduces that added roughness, which spreads that water out back on historic or relic wet meadows, and it encourages sediment to drop out so that our soil and sediment is not lost, and it encourages vegetation to grow through increased moisture. Let's see, next. We got the Zuni Bowl, and this is maybe everybody's favorite structure to build. It is comprised of rock-lined stuff balls in a plunge bowl. It's kind of like a waterfall. And what it does is help to prevent a head cut from migrating upstream. The rocks, they dissipate the energy of falling water and protect the bed of the channel from continued scour. It also helps to maintain soil moisture at the face of the head cut, so right here. And it encourages vegetation to establish and also increase that surface roughness. This is another type of head cut control called rock rundown or rock mulch rundown. There's another variation of this that's called the laid back. And it's used on head cuts that are laid back and that have a certain angle of repose. And the added layer of rock, it just helps to slow down the runoff. Again, it's protecting the channel. It's helping to recruit vegetation, and it's also preventing that head cut from advancing further upslope. This is a media luna, or half moon, as you can see. And this takes concentrated flows and it spreads them back out onto drying meadows. You can also flip this structure around with the tips pointing down to prevent a gully from continuing upstream. And here is dredge fencing, and I just wanted to show this picture as well. This is that behavioral structure, and so cattle, you know, they want to just walk up and down. It's nice and soft down here in the valley, but that's creating that trailing. And so when we have these fences, and it's just an expanse of about 50 feet to 125 feet typically, and it's just pushing the cattle up out of the meadow so that we're not continuing that erosion in the meadow. And so Erica had mentioned what the water wants to do, and reading the landscape is part of figuring that out. Big, deep gullies like this in a meadow are not typical unless there's been some driver of that. So we learn to read the topography, which can tell us that something's changed in the landscape. We can also look deeper at the soil. Are there anaerobic soils typical of a wet meadow system? And also looking at vegetation or wetland obligates and backlitive plants. Are they where they typically would be versus where they're showing up? Vegetation shows us where water is and where it isn't. And using these observations, we can figure out what the water is telling us, and that can help us to start to design and plan treatments. So this is probably one of my favorite pictures of our work. And look at this meadow, and we're losing this entire meadow. And with this raw head cut, it's advancing through the meadow, it's tearing it up. But with these logging fabric structures, which we use sometimes if there's no rock or there's issues bringing rock in, we'll use wood. And here you can see that in this time series, over 6 years, that we've been able to save this meadow and even reclaim the gully itself and bring some of that vegetation back. It is really amazing. I mean, this is probably a three foot head cut gully right here that has healed itself. Now, some folks, they might say, well, erosion is natural. Well, some erosion is natural. There's good erosion and there's bad erosion. And bad erosion being that what has been introduced to the landscape and is unnatural through either old roads, that ungulate trailing, or other forms of trailing. And here, we've been able to heal that. And so when we talk about climate change and eradication, we talk about species extinction, this is our answer to that. And this is what I like to call hope through action. This is another favorite time series. Look at this encroaching sagebrush. So talk about how vegetation is an indicator. And look at this, this sagebrush that's encroaching. And sagebrush, it's a water pumping station all its own. Its tap roots can be up to 60 feet long. Its ephemeral roots can also capture water. And they are moving in to claim this drying meadow. And by constructing a media luna, you can see how these structures help to reclaim this wet meadow and increase wetland species. Now, this might sound like evapotranspiration, and it is, but don't forget how much evapotranspiration is happening with the sagebrush, which it would be taking out with those roots, and then as an evergreen would be doing all year round. Sagebrush is a evergreen shrub. And so Gunnison has lost 52% of its wetlands, and this is a way for us to reclaim them and help keep this area resilient to drought and acidification. So if I haven't convinced you yet about the importance of wet meadows, I have a story to share. And man, this area is just so indicative to me of why we're doing what we're doing. And there is this old homestead that's off in the sagebrush. You can kind of see the other outbuilding here. And in one of the buildings, there are tally marks for all of the bushels of potatoes that this family was producing. Actually, in the early 1900s, Gunnison was a potato and strawberry agricultural center. So much so that there were trains that would come in to haul out all those potatoes. Now, look at this photo. Does this look like great potato growing land? And, you know, you can tell that it's dry except for maybe a few willows. So what is this telling us? It's telling us that this land used to be wetter. And as you hike around downslope up here, there is a massive gully next to the current road. And the gully used to be the wagon road up to the house. This wet meadow system that existed here collapsed in the 20s and 30s. It drained out. That old wagon road was just collecting and pulling all of that water out. So there's no potatoes being grown here now. And so to me, saving the wet meadows that we have is critical. It's critical to the wildlife, it's critical for livestock, it's critical for the landscape, and it's critical for people. You know, restoration is yes, about healing the land, and it's also about restoring our relationship to it. And just as an aside, if you've never read Robin Wilkemmer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass, I highly, highly recommend it. So for us, what does this mean, connecting people back to the land? This means a lot of years of work ahead. The Nature Conservancy, they identified over 276 high priority stream miles, and over the last 10 years, we worked on 45 of those. Just let that sink in for a second. We have a lot of work to do, and that's just the high priority areas. The medium priority might be just as important. And for us, this means planning and collaboration. It also means sharing our knowledge and lessons learned, and we've had some. It also means training up that next generation of restoration professionals. We've got a Gunnison base. This is our first year of our Gunnison base cross-boundary conservation crew. And, you know, we're really excited about that endeavor to train up these young people and build careers. And it's looking good so far. It's really exciting to see some bright, passionate young people getting into this work, to carry on that torch, and to take this with them across the West. So, talking about taking this across the West, so what about the steamboat? What about the Yampa? Do these photos maybe look familiar? These photos were taken by our restoration specialist, Sean Connor. He trained and worked closely with Bill Zedike. Now, this is a California Gulch, so it's right there. Now, look at this head cut. Look at this meadow. Look at this huge, beautiful meadow, that sponge, and it is all at risk. And so Sean is actually working this summer with the Yampa Valley Sustainability Council to treat this head cut and others with their climate crew. And last year, the council coordinated with Keep Route Wild for another project. And if you want to get involved, get your hands dirty and learn how to do this work, it is happening there in Steamboat, and you can do this summer, first week of August. I encourage you to check out their website. It is ybsc.org if you want to learn more. So I have to shout out to everyone involved in this incredible project. You know, we've had so many land agencies and ranchers, nonprofits, consultants, and more, and we really couldn't do this without our partners. You know, water and wildlife, they don't know boundaries, and so it's amazing and vital for us to find ways to work across these boundaries as well. So just incredible group of people really looking ahead, you know, back in 2009 and 2011, and coming together to find ways to adapt to climate change. So a big thank you to all of them. And a thank you to all of you for your time and attention.
I don't know. So we started a little bit late, and I've been told that we can take a little extra time because we've got the poster session and lunch next. So I'm gonna ask a couple of questions, and then we'll see if you guys have questions. I'm thinking like maybe 15 minutes. If that's all right. So one thing that First, I wondered, somebody had asked me yesterday about the body of science showing the efficacy of these projects, and I had mentioned Dr. Laura Norman because I had just been reporting on her, but I just also want to add that my book has a very extensive notes section at the back documenting many different scientists' work, so that, plus I think Jackie's white paper could be really good resources. And so speaking of Dr. Laura Norman, one thing that she was finding that she was hearing in Southern Arizona in response to these types of interventions to heal the landscape is that sometimes downstream landowners were worried that these structures might be taking their water. And so she's always at pains to say that these projects are water detention structures, not retention structures. They're slowing water, they're not stopping water. So I'd like to ask both of you related questions. First, Jackie, given your experience as a lawyer with water rights, how are you seeing that question of whether these structures are impinging upon other people's rights? How is that playing out, and are there solutions?
So, back when I was at Colorado Parks and Wildlife in 2018 and starting to do the research on this, that was at the heart of what I wanted to understand. First, how does it affect the hydrology because of water rights, and how we need to make sure we design and manage projects to respect those rights. And I also wanted to understand the science, like, should we be assuming that it harms water rights, or should we start at the place of we should not assume that? So that's when I started doing my research and coming across cases that showed that we should not assume that there is harm to water rights, because cases were starting to show that there were, in fact, benefits. But also, the projects need to be designed carefully. And so the paper, the white paper that I did, includes guidelines for how to do these projects to respect water rights and make sure that you don't impact them, because that's not going to be a win-win for everybody. You need to make sure that you're designing them both in the location and not building, beaver mimicry structures that look like this. They should be very porous so the water keeps flowing through, but that sediment can start happening back behind them, and the beavers can then come and maybe take them over. There's all kinds of things that you need to consider to make sure that you're not impacting water rights. But the one study I found about the evapotranspiration came out of Montana, Montana State University PhD grad student who was working on that question and wanted to understand it. And with very sophisticated, expensive equipment and modeling, he was able to determine that it was so small an amount from the increase in the riparian vegetation that happens when you restore the stream, that it could not be measured at water gauges, which is where water rights are measured, as at water gauges. But it was so small that it could not be measured at a traditional water gauge. And that was really important to understand that. And we need more studies. So the paper is, at the very beginning of the paper, I say, there's enough studies to know how critical it is to move forward with these strategies in a respectful way and making sure you're managing that issue. And there does need to be more research, but we know enough that we should be able to move forward if you follow these kinds of guidelines.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess it's another example of one of those things in which our conventional wisdom in the dominant culture, which is focused on that scarcity, like you're holding back my water, is in fact often inaccurate when we look at it in terms of what these projects are actually doing in terms of healing systems. And I think of Laura Norman's work on Bel-Air Clark's property, which showed that these structures are actually supplying 28% more water than a neighboring creek that had no structures because of all of the fast evaporation that was happening as the water ran over bare rock. So Cheryl, are you hearing these concerns from landowners you're working with that these structures might be taking their water? And if so, how do you talk to the landowners? What do you tell them about that?
Yeah, so, we've actually worked with private property owners since the very beginning. And the project itself, the very first project started out on private property. And we continue to do a lot of work with many private property owners. We got 3 projects this year, and I think what a lot of those folks are seeing is that it's really helping with increasing forage. And so something that I think that is also important here to understand is that we're doing this work in ephemeral and intermittent drainages, and so we're not necessarily seeing a downstream water right per se. And these structures are also very much about erosion control and protecting that channel. And so, yes, some of that water is slowed, but we really see those rock structures really just being a speed bump to help keep the water in the area just a little bit longer, not necessarily to remove it from the system. And like I said, so that water being slowed, it just means more forage for livestock. So a lot of the private property owners that we worked with, they have livestock of some kind, and so for them, they will see this as a benefit. One of the folks that we work with, he's happy to share his name is Lanny Denham, and he's talked about this work and that he'll be driving around his ranch and it's dry, everywhere is dry, and the one spot that is green and is lush is where this work has been done, and he is just such a great advocate of that. And so we're looking forward to continuing to work with private property owners in the future as well. We have dabbled with some perennial stream work, and we've learned a lot from that. Not so much with the rock structures, but other structures, and for us, just learning to make sure that it's not overbuilt and that it is it's porous. And so I think a lot of that is just that it's that relationship building of going down and sitting down with that landowner, whoever is adjacent or that's going to be downstream, and really helping bring them along the science. I think for us, what else we've also learned is getting our water commissioners involved. And I think that if they have an understanding of what's going on and they're brought up on board, that then downstream or later in time, then we're not dealing with water right issues.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's really, there's this education component, right? And some of that is reminding people of the surface-groundwater relationship. And the fact that the West was such a weathered landscape back when we had many, many more beavers and just natural streams that hadn't been degraded by deforestation and grazing. And also the importance of that healthy groundwater table and supplying water to plants and making them less dry and less likely to burn. We just have about 10 more minutes, so a couple more questions. Jackie, could you tell us a little bit about the 2023 stream bill, SB 270, and how that might improve the legal basis for restoration projects. I realize that's a really big topic, but if you could just kind of give us a synopsis.
I'm going to start by just asking the audience how many followed or tracked that bill or understand. Okay. So the Colorado Healthy Headwaters Working Group, our policy members were very much, of course, tracking that bill and providing input on it as it changed. It changed pretty dramatically from the very first introduction of the draft, which was based on the historic footprint. Like, you could do stream restoration as long as you were doing it within the historic footprint and only trying to restore what was historically there. That was what the bill was based on in the beginning. And then those of you who tracked it probably saw how, it changed significantly. And no, I don't have enough time to go into that. I will tell you that I'm going to be here for the poster session. So if you want to come and have a conversation about what that means, certainly I do have a lot of thoughts on that. And the Colorado Healthy Headwaters Working Group is already working on plans to figure out how to do education and training on what that bill means. What projects on the 6 categories that are listed in the bill on minor stream restoration activities, what those mean on the ground, like what projects you can actually move forward with, and which ones may not fall in there, and then what's the path forward for those types of projects. We are waiting for DNR to do some more internal conversations with their staff on what they think where the bill landed and what that's going to mean for them, and especially DWR's administration of the water rights. So we're kind of waiting to get some solid feedback from them before we can move forward with the training on that. So that's kind of the stage that it's at. But again, if you want any more information, I'll be here.
And just really briefly, are there other western states that already have similar legislation that Colorado has faced this on?
Yes, Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, and Montana all have different, slightly different approaches to this, to deal with especially process-based restoration, beaver mimicry in particular. And each one of them took a slightly different path. And I'd say Colorado's is definitely, again, is different. So we definitely have differences in the states, and I'd be happy to talk to folks about that.
Thank you. Question for Cheryl. As I'm sure you know, the U.S. Forest Service and Yampa Valley Sustainability Council are doing similar work to what's happening in California Park, but it's a few years behind what's happened in Gunnison. Do you have advice for other basins that are earlier in the process?
Yeah, like I said, we have a lot of lessons learned, and I think one of the first key points would be that collaboration and that partnership, and just really building that, and who are all of the players, and really asking those questions of, all right, who's missing from the table, and making sure that everyone is there to be having those conversations. I think that we've also really learned that having restoration professionals there that have done this work for a while, that they're involved to help with that technical planning and design. As much as it might seem like, oh, let's just go put rocks in the channel or log structures in the channel, it is really important to have someone that understands ecology, that understands hydrology, that understands geology and soils, biology, all these different things. So having those people at the table so that you're thinking about all those things when you're designing your structures. Like I mentioned, for us, making sure, as we talk about, okay, we've got our NEPA checkbox, and we've got our cultural resources checkbox, but also making sure that we've got that water rights checkbox on there too, and the water commissioner. And then also thinking about in the future that once you put these structures on the landscape, whether it's rocks or wood or a fence, it does mean that you're going to need to do structure maintenance and repair. So thinking long term, what does this mean when you start adding things to the landscape that means that you're going to need to continue to care for it and store it for the life of that structure. I also always encourage people to consider what kind of monitoring and research they want to do. So, is that soil moisture monitoring? Is that vegetation monitoring? And making sure that you're doing that for at least 3 years, if not 5, just so that you can see those trends. There's lots of lessons learned, and I could continue to go on. I'm also happy to share some of our documentation. Our group did put together a technical note that was released from the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and so I'm happy to share that with folks if they would be interested in that document. There's also a document from the Nature Conservancy as well that talks about some of those topics.
Cheryl, one quick follow-up. You talked about how people need to understand that they're going to need to maintain these systems, and I do hear that from a lot of people who do this work. But then there's also stories of structures that were built by indigenous peoples in the Southwest and northern Mexico hundreds of years ago that are still there and that are still performing their function. Do you have any sense of why that is, why some of these structures might be more enduring than others?
A lot of the indigenous cultures were very aware and in tune with the natural systems, and so that could be part of it. And so I think it tells us that we need to be really careful about when we're designing. Are we designing it appropriately? Is it big enough? Is it too big? Really asking those questions of what we're trying to do. What is the goal here? Are we trying to arrest a head cut, or are we trying to regrade a channel, or are we just trying to slow the water down? And I think, like I said, having that group of people to ask all of those questions with can help build better structures.
Great, thank you. We're about to wrap up, so I just want to say thank you so much to Jackie and to Cheryl. And I think, is Tim settled in here? Oh, hi. I think he wanted to say a few words about local work.
Cheryl is covering that.
Okay.
There will be posters at the poster session about the work in California Park.
Okay, great. Did everyone hear that information at the poster session about the work in California Park? All right, well, thank you so much, and enjoy lunch and the poster session.
Great, thank you so much for that wonderful panel. I just want to wrap us up here. We are going to transition to a poster session. If you didn't see it already, we have lunch provided, so please stick around for the poster session. And we also have an exciting announcement. YBR is not over. We have a field excursion, which is very exciting, and I will pass over to Nathan Stewart to talk a little bit about this.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you to our panelists here. Just a quick announcement as we're starting to transition. We want to highlight, if you look up at the main screen here just for a moment, that we have a poster session getting set up here in a moment. Please help yourself to food. If you're going to step out, come on back. Following that session, we have a really special field excursion. I'm going to let this sit up here for a moment so people can look at it. We'll make a quick announcement during the poster session as well. Thank you, everyone.